What if I told you that on a cold November night in 1986, two men sat alone in the Oval Office, knowing that their next conversation could bring down a presidency? A conversation so sensitive that it remained classified for over 30 years. November 13th, 1986. President Ronald Reagan paced behind his desk, the weight of revelation heavy on his shoulders. Just hours earlier, a Lebanese magazine had broken the story that would become known as the Iran-Contra affair. But what happened that night between Reagan and his trusted CIA director William Casey has never been fully revealed. Until now. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed 9 p.m. as Casey entered through the side door of the Oval Office, his familiar shuffling gait echoing softly on the presidential seal woven into the carpet. The smell of Reagan's favorite jelly beans mixed with the scent of leather-bound books and polished wood. But tonight, the usual warmth of the room felt cold, almost foreboding. Casey's face was grim. At 73 years old, the former Wall Street lawyer had seen plenty of crises, but nothing quite like this. In his weathered hands, he carried a manila folder marked with the highest security classification, a folder that contained intelligence assessments that could shatter the Reagan legacy. "Mr. President," Casey said, his distinctive Brooklyn accent cutting through the silence, "we have a problem that goes deeper than anyone realizes." Reagan stopped pacing and turned to face the man he had trusted with America's most sensitive secrets. What Casey was about to reveal would challenge everything Reagan thought he knew about the operations his administration had been conducting in secret. But here's where the story takes a turn that intelligence historians only discovered in 2018 when a trove of previously classified CIA documents was finally released to the public. Casey opened the folder and spread several photographs across Reagan's desk. Satellite images, bank transfer records, and coded communications that painted a picture of an operation far more complex than the simple arms for hostages deal that was being reported in the news. "Ron," Casey said, using the president's first name as only his closest advisors were allowed to do, "I need you to understand something. What's being reported is just the tip of the iceberg." The room fell silent except for the steady tick of that grandfather clock. Reagan's famous charm and easy smile were nowhere to be seen. The man who had dominated Hollywood and conquered politics now faced the possibility that his presidency might not survive the scandal that was about to engulf Washington. Imagine being in Reagan's position. You're 75 years old, in the final years of what many consider a transformative presidency. Everything you've worked for, everything you believe in, suddenly hangs in the balance because of decisions made by people you trusted. What would you do? Casey pointed to one particular document, a communication intercept that showed something the public didn't know. The operation hadn't just been about freeing American hostages in Lebanon. It had evolved into something much larger, a secret war chest designed to fund anti-communist operations around the world, completely outside congressional oversight. "Mr. President," Casey continued, "the NSC staff took this operation far beyond what we originally discussed. Colonel North and Admiral Poindexter, they created what amounts to a shadow foreign policy apparatus." Reagan sank into his familiar chair, the one positioned perfectly to catch the morning light during his regular briefings. But on this November night, the only illumination came from the soft glow of the desk lamp, casting long shadows across both men's faces. You'll soon discover how Casey's next words would determine not just Reagan's political survival, but the future of American covert operations for decades to come. Casey leaned forward, lowering his voice to almost a whisper. "Ron, I'm going to be straight with you. There are things that happened that you never authorized, operations that went beyond anything we discussed. But if this comes out the wrong way, it won't matter what you knew or didn't know." The CIA director's words hung in the air like smoke. Reagan had built his political career on the image of the ultimate outsider, the Hollywood actor who brought common sense to Washington. But Casey was telling him that his own administration had created exactly the kind of secretive, unaccountable government operation that Reagan had always opposed. "What are you recommending, Bill?" Reagan asked, his voice betraying none of the turmoil that must have been churning inside him. Casey's response would become one of the most controversial pieces of advice ever given to an American president, advice that remained buried in classified files until those 2018 document releases. Which side do you believe was right? Those who said Reagan should have immediately disclosed everything he knew, or Casey's calculated approach to managing the crisis? Tell us below. "Mr. President," Casey said, pulling out a second folder, "we have two choices. We can get ahead of this story by controlling the narrative, or we can let others control it for us." Inside that folder were draft statements, prepared by Casey's staff, outlining different approaches to handling the brewing scandal. But what Casey said next revealed the true depth of his relationship with Reagan, a bond forged through years of fighting what they both saw as America's greatest enemy, Soviet communism. "Ron, you and I both know why we did this. We saw American hostages suffering in Lebanon. We saw communist forces spreading across Central America. We did what we thought was right, even when Congress tied our hands." Casey's voice grew stronger, more determined. "The question now is whether we let this destroy everything we've accomplished. Stay with me, because what happened next would define how both men would be remembered by history." Reagan stood up and walked to the windows overlooking the south lawn. Outside, the bare branches of the oak trees swayed in the November wind. For a moment, the two men stood in complete silence, the weight of 8 years of partnership and shared convictions filling the space between them. When Reagan finally spoke, his words revealed the character that had carried him from a small town in Illinois to the most powerful office in the world. "Bill, I won't abandon the people who served this country, even if they made mistakes. But I also won't compromise the office of the presidency to protect anyone, including myself." Casey nodded slowly. He had gotten his answer. The next morning, Reagan would begin the process that would lead to the appointment of a special prosecutor, congressional hearings that would dominate the news for months, and ultimately, Casey's own resignation due to a brain tumor that would claim his life just months later. The Iran-Contra affair would become a defining moment of the Reagan presidency, but that November night conversation between two old warriors revealed something profound about loyalty, leadership, and the price of covert operations in a democracy. Casey never lived to see how history would judge their decisions. But Reagan would spend his remaining years defending not just his own actions, but the memory of the man who had served as his eyes and ears in the shadows of the Cold War. The song Reagan turned to during those difficult final years was "My Way" by Frank Sinatra, a reflection on choices made and prices paid. I leave you with the song Reagan loved to listen to during his most challenging moments. See you in the next video.